Hello, Little House friends. Welcome to Lessons with Laura. I am Laura Ingalls Gunn. This week we're going to be taking a look at These Happy Golden Years, which was first published in 1943. Now, if you have any interest in fashion or sewing, this is truly my favorite of the Little House books that talks about how clothing was constructed, and Laura provides so many wonderful historical details. So we're going to be reading two chapters, the first of which is Haste to the Wedding, which talks about Laura packing her going away trunk. And then we will follow up looking at a new calico work dress that I just made. Our recipe for this week is a delicious roasted hen, and we'll have an accompanying chapter that talks about that. So let's get started. Chapter 32, Haste to the Wedding. Tuesday morning, Pa drove to town, and at noon he came back bringing Laura a present of a new trunk. "Better put your things into it today," he said. With Ma's help, Laura packed her trunk that afternoon. Her old rag doll, Charlotte, with all her clothes carefully packed in a cardboard box, she put it in the very bottom. Laura's winter clothes were laid in next, then her sheets and pillowcases and her brown poplin. The pink lawn was carefully laid on top so that it would not be crushed. In the hat box of the trunk's till, Laura put her new hat with the ostrich tips, and in the shallow till itself, she had her knitting and crochet needles and worsted yarns. So when a young lady was setting up her newlywed home, she would take things along with her that she would need. And as Almanzo was a farmer, Laura needed to pack a couple of work dresses. And earlier last week, I shared on my Instagram and Instagram stories that I was at the Little House on the Prairie site in Independence, Kansas. And there was a bit of fall crispness in the air, and the prairie winds were blowing hard, but I was actually very comfortable working outdoors wearing the dress that you see in the background. So let's take a closer look. If you follow me on Instagram, you may have seen that last week I was working at the Little House on the Prairie site in Independence, Kansas. And I was wearing this latest garment that I created while working in the pasture and filming footage for the Lessons with Laura series finale, which is set 2 weeks from today. Now, don't fear, because we are going to be continuing our Wednesday visits. They are just going to transition to a Tasha Tudor Christmas. If you aren't aware of who Tasha Tudor was, she was an amazing illustrator and book author, and she was well known for wearing garments that were historical from about the 1830s to the turn of the century, even in her everyday life. And so I wanted to create a garment that was very reminiscent of something Tasha Tudor would have worn, but also would have fit in to Laura's world. Now, 2 weeks ago, I had shared that I was hand dyeing a garment, and it actually was this now cranberry hued Sontag. And this is a wonderful sweater. It keeps your arms free for work, but really keeps your torso warm. There was a great wind blowing across the Kansas prairie while I was there, but I was very comfortable. And the Sontag just crosses over and it hooks in the back, so it's very easy to get on and off. And since I have the mannequin turned, you'll also notice that my apron is attached with a button. Now, this is a style that Tasha Tudor often made on her aprons, and the Pioneers also used this style quite often. By not having long apron ties, especially when you're working with equipment, you don't want to run the risk of those ties getting caught in the equipment. So this apron style is in many ways much safer to wear. So I'll take off the apron as well as the Sontag, and we'll talk about this style of dress. This fabric that I made the dress from, I found it last year at an estate sale, and I knew it was vintage fabric because it was only 33 inches wide. Now, in today's fabric, it's standard to either be 45, or if it's home interior fabric, it can be 56 to 60 inches wide. So that's always a good indicator. If your fabric is on the more narrow side, it's probably vintage or antique fabric. And it actually started out a garish yellow. Now, my hope was to dye it a wonderful indigo blue, because if you have ever seen the DVDs Take Joy and Take Peace, Tasha Tudor wears a very similar dress in a beautiful indigo color. Well, that is such the nature of dyes, and it does make sense that my fabric turned out green, not indigo. And I'm okay with that. I love green. So it has a front closing bodice, and Pioneer women often would select a front closing bodice because then they would be able to dress themselves. If you have a garment that laces or buttons up the back, you oftentimes need assistance, aka a lady's maid, and of course a Pioneer woman would not have that luxury. And the back of the dress features the dropped sleeve and the curved bodice seaming that was prevalent from about the 1840s on, and many times you'll see piping that's added, and that just reinforces the strength of the seam. Because I lined the interior of this bodice, I didn't add piping, plus I was really eking out. I had no leftover scraps when I finished sewing this garment. And it has a waistband, and then you can see that I just opted to attach the skirt with pleating, but gathering is also acceptable. Now, I was talking about that I barely had enough fabric to make this dress, and you'll see here that I added some detailing to the cuff, and the reason for that was I did not have enough fabric to cut the long sleeves that I needed. So on the interior you can see that the sleeve is actually pieced, which that is very historically accurate, and Pioneer women would have done that absolutely. Now, to hide my seam, I just added a bit of cotton braid. I didn't want to add fancy trim because this is a dress that will be worn and washed often. So anything that I added to this dress really needs to hold up well. When you think about the washing methods that the Pioneer women used, such as scrub boards and boiling water and lye soap, the garments really literally went through the wringer, and so they needed to be sturdy. And underneath this dress, I wore a corded petticoat, chemise, and my corset. And the corset, when you're working, the back support is just so wonderful. Carrying buckets, it really supports your inner core, and I'm able to move freely and do all the things that I need to do. And the corded petticoat really keeps the skirts from wrapping around my legs, which, given that it was so windy, I really appreciated that, because if your skirt gets wrapped up, you can trip. And of course, when working on a farm, it's always safety first. Okay, you're gonna sit. Sit down. Sit down. Chapter 25, The Night Before Christmas. In the morning, there would be all the surprises from the stockings, and at noon there would be the special Christmas feast with a big fat hen, stuffed and roasted, brown and juicy, and Almanzo would be there, for Ma had asked him to Christmas dinner. The wind was howling hard, but it had not the shriek and howl of a blizzard wind, so probably he would be able to come tomorrow. "Oh, Laura," Carrie said as Laura blew the lamp in the bedroom, "isn't this the nicest Christmas? Do Christmases get better all the time?" "Yes," Laura said, "they do." So this week's recipe, I am going to try my hand at making some stuffing and a big fat roasted hen. Gracie the dachshund cannot wait. She is going to help us. And I'm also going to set a rustic table, and it is an autumn themed table. So we'll take a look at that. So let's get started. For this week's tablescape, I thought it would be fun to share our formal dining area. We are celebrating all things fall, and I've used some vintage linens. The pedestals come from our oak trees that are on the property. We just cut them in various sizes. I think that adds a fun touch to the table, and it will make for an enjoyable meal. This week's Little House recipe is a roasted chicken with stuffing. Now, many people can be intimidated at the thought of roasting or cooking their own chicken, and actually it couldn't be easier. If you are going to stuff your bird, you'll want to make your stuffing first and let it cool to room temperature. And the pioneers often baked their daily bread every day, and they would save the end pieces as well as any pieces that had gone stale. Kind of like this French bread that's left over from our Italian night last week. And you just want to cube the bread, saute it in a bit of butter, and then add some organic broth to moisten it. And there's an excellent stuffing recipe in the Little House Companion, and a recipe for the roasted hen in the Little House Cookbook. And so once you have your stuffing, you want to make sure that your chicken has been washed out with water. Inside the cavity, you will often find the neck and the giblets. And people are like, ugh, what do you do with this? Well, giblet gravy is absolutely delicious, and if you have the skills, I encourage you to make it. As I mentioned a couple of episodes ago, I am not great at making gravy, so I won't be doing that, but in this pioneering spirit of not wasting anything, I will be roasting it and then dicing it finely. It will be Gracie the Dachshund's dinner, and she'll think that she's died and gone to heaven. So you can actually make a complete meal for dinner or lunch, if that's your big meal of the day, in one pan. With the addition of the stuffing, that's your carbohydrates, and then you can also add your various herbs and garden vegetables. So I went out to my garden today and I found some Swiss chard. I'm actually going to line my aluminum roasting pan with the Swiss chard, and that'll help the chicken from sticking to the bottom of the pan, and it'll make cleanup a lot easier. Plus, the roasted chard will be absolutely delicious. I also found various peppers. Now, my carrots, they weren't quite ready yet. They're still really small. So I'll be using some store-bought carrots that I have in the crisper. And then I have this potato that the eyes are actually starting to sprout. So I need to use that, as well as an onion. I actually might saute the onion in the butter to add to the stuffing, because that would be really delicious. But really, any type of root vegetable works well when you're roasting a chicken. And so I'm going to turn the oven on to 325 so it can preheat. And I am going to make my stuffing first, and then I'll give the chicken its great rub down. You can either rub the interior and exterior of the chicken either with butter or olive oil, and then salt and pepper it really well. And then you can either opt to stuff your bird, which I will do, or leave it. It can cook a bit faster when you don't stuff it. So that is something to consider. Given that I'm on a bit of a time crunch, I may put my stuffing in a separate dish and cook it separately. So I'm going to get started, and when we get to that second step, I'll fire up the camera again. So I prepared my stuffing. Since it is just my husband and I for dinner tonight, I opted to only use half of the bread I had, and I used my food processor to chop it up really quick, added a bit of broth and some rosemary from my herb garden and a bit of saffron for a delicious flavor. I put it in a separate baking dish, and it will go into the oven when there's about 20 minutes left of cooking time for the chicken, so it doesn't dry out. And then for our vegetables, they were chopped up and layered in the pan. Bigger chunks, because it may take the chicken up to 3 hours to roast in the oven. Since I'm not opting to stuff it with the stuffing, it'll go a bit more quickly. And so just to prepare my chicken, I add olive oil to the top and just give it a good massage. I have to keep going. Yes, we live across the street from the fire department, so no, I'm not burning down the house with dinner yet. So a good massage. I always kind of feel like the Swedish chef when I'm doing this. or Julia Child, you'll take the chicken. And so you'll just give him a great, or her, a good rub down to get that skin nice and crispy. And so that the chicken remains juicy, I put some butter inside the cavity. And then you can season it however you want to. Salt, pepper, sage. And I transfer all of my spices that I'm going to use into a cup. You don't want to touch the salt and pepper or any other containers once you've been handling the raw chicken. That's just food safety 101. So again, just sprinkling a little bit, get it in there, get it on the inside, get it on the back, and just really rub it good into the skin. And then once you're ready, you just put it in the roasting pan. Now I'm gonna start with the breast side up, and I'm going to be basting the bird for the next hour or two just so it remains moist. If I find that it's getting too done, I can flip the chicken over. So it's gonna go into a 325 degree oven, but I'm gonna wash my hands first. Oh, the old girl, she's browning beautifully, and the potatoes and carrots are not quite fork tender yet, so we probably have about another 30 minutes to go before it is ready. To check to see if your chicken is done, you can use a meat thermometer. Another old-fashioned trick is if you can easily pull the leg off, then that generally means the interior meat is cooked well too. And I found some Swiss chard, and I'm actually going to line the old aluminum roasting pan that I have with the Swiss chard. Do over. And at noon he came back, and there's our Grace, without fail. So I thought I would try my hand at roasting a turkey, not a turkey, chicken